One aspect of church health is understanding the context around us, understanding the communities in which we are placed. MissionInsite is a tool that helps us to do that. I'm going to now ask Reverend Brian Erickson to come and share how MissionInsite can be helpful in understanding communities.
Thank you, Bishop. MissionInsite actually told me how to dress this morning, and I really appreciate that. I want to return for a moment to the passage that Bob Alford has already mentioned to us this morning, the 10th chapter of Luke, when Jesus is asked perhaps the best question he has ever asked by one of his enemies. Who is my neighbor? If I'm called to love God and to love neighbor as myself, who is my neighbor? What the teacher is actually asking is, who is not my neighbor, right? He wants a metric for mercy. He wants to know where the line is. Where can I stop? And in response, Jesus tells a story about a man who was beaten, left for dead on the road to Jericho. A priest walks by, a priest who had just taught a Wednesday night Bible study on the command to love neighbor. A Levite walks by who spent last weekend handing out Torah tracts that included the command to love neighbor. Presumably the priest and the Levite both, while having plenty of God knowledge, plenty of scriptural knowledge, maybe they can even run an admin board meeting, they seem to have a lack of neighbor knowledge. They don't know what their neighbor looks like. They don't know who their neighbor is, and so they drive right past them on the road, their praise music turned up just enough to drown out the outside world. Who is my neighbor? I want to propose to you today that many of our churches likewise have a problem recognizing their neighbors, who God has called us to reach and to serve. We bear more resemblance, friends, to the disciples locked in the upper room on the day before Pentecost, rolling dice in an SPRC meeting to fill our empty staff positions, than we do to those same Galileans who spill onto the streets of Jerusalem, set on fire by God, speaking in the native tongue of the hungry hearts they meet on the street. In this room, we may disagree about a number of things. We certainly represent very different communities, very different congregations, but can we all agree on this one basic point? If we are going to love our neighbor as ourselves, every church must know who their neighbor is. Too often we confuse our history in a community with neighbor knowledge. We think we know where we live and do ministry, and maybe we did once. But anecdotes and stereotypes do not mean you really know the mission field God has placed you in. Churches that last multiple generations at one address must by necessity reinvent themselves multiple times. While our address may stay the same, our neighborhood does not. And the great news is that there is a simple, free solution that every church can use regardless of whether you are in the middle of the city or the middle of nowhere, whether you have a large staff or you have a hard time coming up with a quorum on Sunday mornings. MissionInsite.com gives you a free, accurate, crystal clear picture of who your neighbor is right now and what your neighbor will look like in 5 years. It's based on the most up-to-date census and demographic research available, and it can be used by any church. It's been used by struggling churches to drop programs that weren't reaching their communities and to focus on the people that Christ has called them to. It's helped growing churches make better informed strategic decisions about what the future will look like for their ministry. And it is free. Have I mentioned this yet? It does not cost you anything. The conference is already paying for you to use it. This is not something you've got to go home and raise funds to utilize in your community. It is just sitting on the shelf, and you just haven't gotten your login and password yet from your district office or Bob's office at Healthy Congregations. There is no excuse for us not to use this tool. Lay delegates, at lunch today, please ask your pastor to see a MissionInsite report about your community. Remind them it is free. And pastors, before you go slash the tires on my truck, the best thing about MissionInsite is that you do not have to be computer savvy to use it. You can certainly dig down deep into its many features if you like, but if you and your leadership want to have a real conversation about what your mission context looks like. It literally takes less than 5 minutes to print out up to 5 different reports for you that will summarize everything about the area around your church. What if the next time your leadership team or your staff was going to think through a significant decision or start a new ministry program, you didn't just start with the same old ideas, rehashing the same programs that worked for a different set of neighbors, but you began with a prayerful look at where you have been planted and who lives there. It will even help you do better ministry with the people you already have. MissionInsite will plot the addresses of your existing membership so you can see where small groups make the most sense, what neighborhoods you've missed, how far are people driving on average in order to worship with you on a Sunday morning, what church member lives closest to that new visitor from last weekend. And if you hate free things, if you're just against them as a matter of principle, you can spend $50, and MissionInsite will even plot the last 500 new families to move into your community, and you can see who has already moved into the neighborhoods where you have a presence. Bishop Snazy this morning talked about learning congregations that are willing to meet obstacles with growth and openness to new ideas rather than the anxiety that most of us work with as a spiritual gift. Friends, I can't tell you what program will work for your place. What works in mine probably won't work for you. But if we are unwilling to learn who our neighbors are, then we deserve whatever unfruitfulness comes our way. When we were prayerfully discerning what it would look like for Trinity in Birmingham to help launch a multicultural congregation, and I knew a bunch of flowery words from the senior pastor probably wouldn't be enough, MissionInsite generated a map for us that plotted out the racial divides in our community, a mosaic of who our neighbors really are, not who we think they are. And right there on the boundary line between 2 racially different parts of Birmingham stood our Oxmoor Road campus. That picture, a graphic generated by census data for heaven's sakes, was much more powerful than my words could have been because it was a call. Who is my neighbor? If you take Jesus' story as your answer, loving your neighbor doesn't mean you have to reach everyone, but it does mean you have to reach everybody who shares the road with you. And that begins with seeing them. MissionInsite is simple, it is free, and it might be just the thing that can help us see through the stained glass windows of our sanctuaries, through the narrow frame of our own bias, to who our neighbors really are. And it is free. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
All right, Brian. Thank you. Thank you very much. Brian, I have one question for you. How much does MissionInsite cost?
It's 4 easy payments of nothing, Bishop.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very good. That's good news. We appreciate it.